Welcome to Chapter 11 on Gender, Sex, and Sexuality. In this chapter, we're going to look at sex and gender, gender development, gender differences, sexual orientation, sexual behaviors and practices, sexual variations and disorders in health and wellness. In 2013, the U.S. Department of Defense lifted the ban on women serving in combat. This recent change has finally marked a decision that had many women feeling this now fits into their lives. In 2015, for the first time in history, 2 women graduated the Army Ranger School, an already prestigious honor, making it even more historical. Despite our biological sex seeming to be a perfect fit, sexuality can be complex and its impact on our sex and gender equally profound. So sex refers to the properties of a person that determine his or her classification as male or female. There are 5 physical characteristics that are used to classify sex. They're chromosomes, gonads, hormones, genitalia, and secondary sex characteristics. Sex chromosomes are the 23rd pair of chromosomes that determine a person's sex, male or female. Females have 2 sex chromosomes that are similar, and they're called X chromosomes. Males have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome. Another structure used to classify us as male or female are our gonads, a part of the endocrine system that produces sex hormones and generates ova in females and sperm in males. In females, the gonads are called the ovaries, and in males, the gonads are called the testes. Sex may also be classified by the hormones that these gonads produce. Female hormones are estrogens and male hormones are androgens. These hormones play a role in the development of internal reproductive structures, external genitalia, and secondary sex characteristics. At puberty, we develop secondary sex characteristics or traits that differ between the 2 sexes, but are not part of the reproductive system. Puberty is a period of rapid skeletal and sexual maturation occurring in adolescence. The social and psychological aspects of being male or female is known as gender, which goes beyond the biological sex and includes a person's understanding of the meaning to his or her own life of being male or female. Gender identity is an individual sense of belonging to the male or female sex and is multifaceted. Terms such as masculinity and femininity attributes, meaning being like a man or being like a woman, have been exchanged for more broad attributes such as instrumentality for more masculine traits and expressiveness for more feminine traits. Individuals who are high in both dimensions are considered androgynous, meaning that they have attributes we typically associate with both genders. Research shows that individuals who are not strongly gender typed according to these scales tend to have better psychological adjustment and resilience, more so than those rated as extremely masculine or feminine. Individuals who are low on both dimensions are considered undifferentiated. After conception, male and female embryos look alike. The penis and clitoris take shape from the same embryonic structures, as does the development of the testes and ovaries and the scrotum and labia. The difference in male and female biological development is a particular gene on the Y chromosome, called the SRY gene. Approximately 3 months after conception, this gene is activated, causing the development of the embryonic testes that manufacture androgens spreading throughout the entire body, thus influencing the development of the body and the brain. These early processes might seem to set the stage for sex and potentially gender. Prenatal hormones do play a role in brain development. However, the role of nature, biological factors, and nurture, experience, and gender development are complex. It may seem easy to think of sex as biological and gender as more psychological, but this is too simplified. And both sex and gender are intertwined, and there is no simple boundary. The notions of mind and body are specifically linked to this very topic. Prenatal hormonal exposure, chromosomal abnormalities, and environmental factors can affect the developing genitals. The results are sexually ambiguous, resulting in an intersex condition or hermaphroditism, which falls under the category of disorders of sexual development. In the book, the famous John Jones case illustrates the flexibility of gender and nurture's triumph over nature. Over time, Joan really became David, demonstrating the large biological factors that guided the way from sex to gender identity. Socialization is powerfully related to gender identity, but not perfectly. Determining a child's physical condition, being male or female, when ambiguous genitalia are present, is a difficult choice that should be based on the child's well-being and future sexual functioning and not on parental distress. Transgender refers to experiencing one's psychological gender as different from one's physical sex. Transgender identity is more common in natal males, male to female, than natal females, female to male. Gender dysphoria is a defining feature of gender identity and is explained as distress over one's born sex. There is controversy whether such individuals should be considered as having a disorder at all. Treatment for transgender individuals involves gradual stages that move from reversible treatments to permanent ones. Many transgender individuals do not elect the sex reassignment surgery and opt for hormone treatment only, while others simply think of their gender identity in an alternate way. Biological factors such as genes, gonads, and hormones are linked with a person's biological sex and their eventual psychological feelings of gender. Research done on infants attending to a face or mobile toy demonstrated differences in gender such that female babies spent more time looking at the face while male infants spent more time observing the toy. This suggests that these differences are biologically ingrained and that the children have not yet had social experiences to influence their gender development. Evolutionary psychology views the biological differences between the sexes through the lens of natural selection, competition, and choice. Sexual selection means that the male and female members of a species differ from each other because of difference in competition and choice. Competition occurs among members of the same sex, thus members of the opposite sex exercise choice, selecting the lucky one or ones. The sex that invests the most in producing offspring is the one that chooses, and the other sex is the one that competes. This is evident in human behavior in men and women. Women are the sex that give birth, and such ought to do the choosing. Men show characteristics that are thought to be well suited for competing, such as physical size. In general, sexual selection is more complicated in humans than any other species, as sometimes men get to be the choosers and women are the competitors vying for men who are likely to invest in their children. Men and women have the same evolutionary goal, to reproduce, but how they accomplish that poses different challenges. Women can reproduce only about once a year and have limited time of fertility, thus women must choose sexual partners of quality. Comparatively, men can focus on quantity as they are typically fertile from puberty through the rest of their lives. However, due to the helplessness of infants, it is adaptive for men to invest in their offspring. One challenge is that men may not be certain whether a child whom he is investing is genetically his. To combat this challenge, evolutionary psychologists point out that across cultures, men are more likely to prefer women who are younger than they are, being more interested in physical appearance, and this is thought to represent health and fertility. Social cognitive approaches focus on how children learn about gender and how they occupy a gender identity. Internalizing information about gender and environmental reinforcers of gender-related behavior are key aspects to this approach. Gender is learned through rewards and punishments, observational learning, and modeling. Children may also be rewarded for engaging in gender-conforming behavior and punished for engaging in behavior that does not fit with expectations for their sex, called gender non-conforming behavior. Peer play is important in gender development, especially after the age of 6. Through these experiences, children develop gender schemas, a mental framework for understanding what is considered appropriate behavior for females and males in their culture. Social and cultural factors have a strong influence on the development of gender identity. The social role theory proposes to understand gender through the larger social and cultural context surrounding gender identity. Eagle's perspective includes that men and women are physically different, attributes to the evolutionary perspective, and that these differences result in a division of labor between the sexes, with women being more involved in the home and child rearing, and men being more likely to work outside the home. The division of labor can contribute to the beliefs that the things men and women do are the things men and women should do. This creates the idea of gender roles, social constructs for how females and males should think, act, and feel. Gender roles are related to gender stereotypes, which are overly general beliefs and expectations about what men and women are like. These stereotypes influence our perception of how people and how we interpret behavior. In 2015, American actress Jennifer Lawrence discovered she was making substantially less than her male counterparts in the film American Hustle. In 2016, the median income for women in the U.S. was about 79% of men's median income. Jennifer Lawrence acknowledged that she wanted to be liked, which influenced her decision to close the deal without a fight. Studies have found that men made more money from negotiations, and that there are gender differences that affect such factors involved in this, such as experience, advocacy, and information. If women were equally experienced in negotiating, they did as well as men. If women were advocating for someone else's gain, they performed as well as men. When the range of negotiation was provided, women were effective in arguing for the high end of the scale. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was signed into law to extend the amount of time employees have to file claims of pay discrimination. Ms. Ledbetter was paid thousands less than her male co-workers in the very same job for 19 years. If women fail to ask for what they are worth, should employers be held responsible? How might the factors that influence women's negotiation performance apply to other groups, such as age and ethnicity? The most comprehensive view of gender and its origin takes into account all of these theories. One theory alone cannot account for all the differences and variations we see among gender in its development. Each theory plays a role in its application and explanation of gender identity, and the importance of taking all theories into account to help psychologists understand such a complex construct. You're going to see a couple descriptive words that are going to pop on the screen in pairs. And what we want you to do is identify which of the words you would assign to males or females. Who are more? Assertive, rational. Emotional, aggressive. Strong, sexually adventurous. Creative, reserved. Verbal, active. Now, how did you come about those answers? Is it based on experience? Or is it what you have learned should be assigned to male or female? Looking across groups, it is important to remember that even when there are statistically large differences between groups, it does not justify judging a person by group membership. For example, males are 4 times as likely as females to have a reading disorder and 10 times as likely to have a severe reading disorder. Also, on average, left-handed individuals are more likely to have a reading disorder than right-handers. So if you meet a left-handed male, should you infer that he probably has trouble reading? Should gender be used as the basis for assigning students to remedial reading? Doesn't make sense, does it? Although the stereotype of emotionality is largely a woman's expectation, research has found that men and women are more alike in the way that they experience emotion than the stereotype would lead us to believe. Where the differences lie suggests that women report more feelings of sadness and anxiety than men do, and men report more anger and irritability than women. Gender differences in emotion are much more tied to social context than to biological sex. Empathy is a person's feeling of oneness with the emotional state of another. Women report themselves as more empathetic than men. The theory of mind may suggest where these differences in empathy develop. Generally, women are more helpful than men when doing so does not involve a risk to their personal safety. The underrepresentation of women in the math and science fields has always been a topic of debate. The reason for such a discrepancy may not lie in one factor, but an interrelation between many factors. Research on cognitive abilities show no differences between men and women in general intellectual ability, and girls tend to perform better in school than boys. Specifically, women tend to score higher on verbal ability tasks, whereas boys tend to outperform girls on tasks related to visual spatial ability. Biological, evolutionary, and social role theories all explain these differences. The gender similarity hypothesis states that men and women are much more similar than they are different. Aggression is defined as any behavior intending to harm another person. There are different types of aggression. Overt aggression refers to physically or verbally harming another person directly, and higher scores are associated with males more so than females. Relational aggression is the behavior that is meant to harm the social standing of another person through activities such as gossiping, and spreading rumors. Females tend to score higher on this type of aggression than males. This aggressive behavior requires considerable cognitive and social skills. What do you think the difference is? The ways people experience and express themselves as a sexual being are referred to as sexuality. Sexuality involves activity that is associated with sexual pleasure. Again, those stereotypes suggest that there are very strong differences in sexuality between men and women. Research has shown that these differences are smaller and less consistent than those stereotypes might suggest. Social expectations often influence people's responses to questions about their sexual behavior. Men report thinking about sex more than women report, but they also think about food and sleep more so than women. Women generally think less about sex and more about resources, which may be explained by reproductive needs. In general, women have fewer sexual partners than men and show more selective behaviors when picking out a mate and engaging in sexual behaviors than men do. Men are more likely to engage in masturbation and have higher sexual drives and more permissive attitudes about casual premarital sex. Women show more changes in sexual patterns and sexual desire over their lifetime than men. For example, they are more likely to have sexual experience with same or opposite sex partners even if they identify themselves as strongly heterosexual or lesbian. Gender differences appear to be the strongest in the areas of aggression and seem to be weaker in the domains of cognitive ability and sexuality. Sexual orientation is the direction of one's erotic interest and does not simply imply behavior, but instead includes the whole range of human experiences such as desires, feelings, fantasies, and a sense of identity. Heterosexual refers to being sexually attracted to members of the opposite sex. Homosexual refers to being sexually attracted to members of the same sex. Bisexual refers to individuals that are attracted to people of both sexes. Research suggests that these labels can be misleading and do not represent the fluidity of attraction or behavior that is demonstrated by many individuals. Homosexual behavior is relatively common in nature and occurs in over 1,500 species. Homosexuality is present in all cultures regardless of tolerance. Gary Gates in 2011 summarized the available data in the U.S. and concluded that approximately 3.8% or 9 million Americans are gay, lesbian, or bisexual. However, these numbers should be evaluated cautiously as fear of discrimination plays a large factor that may prevent individuals from answering honestly on surveys. Orientation is not influenced by being reared by a gay parent or parenting style or any type of childhood sexual experimentation. Things to think about in terms of sexual orientation. It is important to think about the unlikelihood of a single cause, that there are many factors that work together to foster sexual orientation. There's also within group variation. This variation exists within any group, making it difficult to generalize across groups. Research has challenges in terms of representativeness in samples because not everyone is going to be open about their sexual identity or orientation. The meaning of cross-sex similarities also plays a role. And then also explaining sexual orientation does not mean explaining only homosexuality. A good theory should explain how any of us become sexually oriented towards a particular sex. In terms of genetic influences, twin research shows that genes play a role in sexual orientation, but is not as strong as an influence as they are for other characteristics such as intelligence. Levels of prenatal androgens play a crucial role in the development of sexual characteristics. By identifying the physical features associated with prenatal testosterone, researchers may be able to examine whether females who were exposed to prenatal androgens are more likely to be bisexual or lesbian than homosexual. One potential feature of prenatal hormone exposure is the 2D/4D ratio, meaning the ratio between the second and fourth digits on the hand. Men tend to have a ring finger that is longer than their pointer finger, while for women, the two fingers are nearly the same length. Genes may have an influence on sexual orientation through their effect on brain development. Two particular types of brain differences have gotten the attention of researchers: the thickness of the corpus callosum and the symmetry of the brain's two hemispheres. Evidence suggests that gay men may have a thicker corpus callosum than heterosexual men, and heterosexual women and gay men show similar patterns in the use of brain hemispheres. The differences may be attributed to hereditability in terms of the corpus callosum and prenatal hormones, explaining the hemispheric symmetry. There is no evidence that specific parental styles cause sexual orientation, and observational learning doesn't account for the fact that many people who grow up in bisexual or homosexual parents are heterosexual in orientation. Scientists are focused on gender nonconforming behaviors and childhood experiences and indicators of sexual orientation development. Overall, there are many factors associated with sexual orientation, and many questions still remain. Research shows no differences among lesbians, gays, bisexuals, or heterosexuals in a wide range of attitude and behaviors, as well as psychological adjustment. One area of well-being for gays and lesbians is coping with prejudice and discrimination. Among gay men and lesbians polled in one survey, 90% reported that discrimination against homosexuals remains a serious problem. But about the same percentage also reported that people around them have become more accepting in recent years. Gays and lesbians' openness about their sexual orientation is related to progress in changing cultural attitudes and is also a strong predictor of psychological and physical health. Gay men and lesbian women report themselves as more satisfied in their relationships compared to heterosexual couples. Heterosexual couples may feel more pressure to get married and stay married regardless of satisfaction, and homosexuals may manage conflict in relationships more successfully than heterosexual couples. Homosexual couples are more likely to end their relationships compared to heterosexual couples. This may be due to barriers such as legal constraints of divorce or the welfare of children, which may change over time as marriage between same-sex couples has become legal in some states, and also same-sex couples in some states may adopt children. Gay and lesbian couples are less likely to have children, but increasingly, gay, lesbian, and transgender families are including children. Children reared by gay men and lesbian women tend to be as well adjusted as those from heterosexual households. Around the world, same-sex marriages are recognized in 20 nations, and in 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the key portions of the Defense of Marriage Act, allowing the U.S. to join those 20 other nations. What constitutes sexual behavior is not easy to define. Sexual behaviors include behaviors that are specific to each individual and that are pleasurable in a particular way, one that is usually intimate and personal. For adolescents, confusion about what counts as sex can lead to risky behaviors. How adolescents initiate sex may have positive or negative consequences for their sexual health. Alfred Kinsey brought scientific attention to sexual behavior. He published the Kinsey Report, which reported that the following: bisexuality was more frequent than thought, and 50% of married men had been sexually unfaithful. In 1994, a more accurate, comprehensive study was completed by Robert Michael, who found that for most Americans, marriage and monogamy rule sexual behavior. Married couples reported having sex more frequently than other categories of couples. Hart and Hatfield conducted a study in which a stranger would walk up to a college student and ask them one of three questions. Would you go on a date with me? Would you go to my apartment? Would you go to bed with me? With the go on a date option, approximately 45% of males stated that they would, and 48% of the females. Go to my apartment, 65% males, only 1% of the females. Go to bed with me, 78% of the males agreed, only 0 of the females. How would you explain this from a social role theory? In 2002, the Center for Disease Control conducted a study on sexual behaviors in the U.S. and found that in general, 10% of men and 8% of women had never had sex. 97% had vaginal intercourse and 90% had had oral sex. Among men, 40% had had anal sex, and among women, 35% had had anal sex. Research on sexual behaviors in gay and lesbian populations is limited. In general, gay men engage in mutual masturbation, oral sex, and anal sex. Among lesbian women, practices include genital-to-genital contact, mutual fondling and masturbation, penetration with the hands or other objects, and oral sex. Generally, males are capable of only one orgasm before passing on to a refractory period. In contrast, many females are capable of multiple orgasms. On the other hand, 40% of women report having difficulty achieving orgasm at all, and 10% report having never had an orgasm. Finally, many women report that achieving orgasm is not necessarily the most important thing about sex for them. The human sexual response pattern consists of 4 phases as identified by Masters and Johnson. The excitement phase is the beginning of the process of erotic responsiveness. It lasts for several minutes to several hours. There's engorgement of blood vessels and increased blood flow in the genital area, and muscle tension, lubrication of the vagina, and partial erection of the penis occurs. In the plateau phase, breathing increases, the pulse rate increases, and blood pressure. There's penile erection and vaginal lubrication become more complete, and the person is closer to orgasm. In orgasm, there's an explosive discharge of neuromuscular tension and intense pleasurable feeling. There's a release of the neurotransmitter oxytocin, and it lasts for about 3 to 15 seconds. There's also a resolution or refractory period where the blood vessels return to normal state. Females may be stimulated to orgasm without delay, and men enter the refractory period during which they cannot have another orgasm. Kaplan's work highlights a key initial phase, desire, which emphasizes the importance of motivation in sexual activity. Sexual behavior is influenced by a variety of factors ranging from sensation and perception to the ways we think about sexuality. Sexual motivation is influenced by sexual scripts, which are stereotype patterns for how people should behave sexually. Men and women tend to have different sexual scripts. Women tend to link sex with intimacy, and men are more likely to emphasize sexual conquest. Cognitive interpretation involves our perception of our sexual partner and the partner's perception of us. The sensory system of touch is usually predominant during sexual intimacy, but vision also plays an important role for some individuals. Women tend to be more motivated by touch, whereas men are more motivated by what they see. Cultural factors can also influence sexual behavior and orientation. The range of sexual values across cultures is substantial. Research on the Innisbeag people off the coast of Ireland and the Mangian culture in the southern Pacific illustrate the vast differences of sexual behaviors and attitudes. John Messenger studied those of the island of Innisbeag and found that they knew nothing of tongue kissing or hand stimulation of the penis, and they detested nudity. Premarital sex was out of the question, and men avoided most sexual experiences because they believed that intercourse reduced their energy level and that it was bad for their health. They would only have sexual intercourse at night, and it was very quickly, and female orgasm was extremely rare. The people of the Mangian culture in the South Pacific, however, the young boys were taught about masturbation, and they were encouraged to engage in it as much as they liked. At age 13, they underwent a ritual initiation into sexual manhood. First, the elders instructed them about sexual strategies on how to aid their female partner into having orgasm. 2 weeks later, the boy would have intercourse with an experienced woman who helped him hold back from ejaculation until she experienced orgasm. By the end of adolescence, the Mangians had sex pretty much every day, and Mangian women reported a high frequency of orgasm. This research was by Donald Marshall. In the United States, sexual behaviors and attitudes reflect the country's diverse population, suggesting that we are more conservative in our sexual habits than once thought, but are more open-minded regarding sexual orientation than a century ago. There are 2 main goals of sex education that are universally shared. 1, encourage the very young to delay sexual activity, and 2, reduce teen pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. A comprehensive sex education involves providing students with a knowledge about sexual behavior, birth control, and the use of condoms, and protecting against sexually transmitted infections, while encouraging abstinence and the delay of sexual activity. Abstinence-only education emphasizes that any sexual behavior outside of marriage is harmful to the individual of any age. This type of education promotes the notion that abstinence is the only effective way to avoid pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. In many communities, sexual education has not caught up with the research findings. Most research on adolescent sexuality suggests that knowledge about contraceptive use does not increase the incidence of sexual intercourse and are more likely to reduce adolescent pregnancy. A fetish is an object or activity that arouses sexual interest or desire and includes erotic material such as pornographic images or films, clothing, or other physical objects. Individuals who get sexual pleasure from wearing clothing of the opposite sex are said to have a transvestic fetish. Sadomasochism involves the domination of one person in a manner that both people gain sexual pleasure from. These behaviors are not considered abnormal so long as both individuals are consenting adults, do not experience personal distress, and are not putting anyone in harm or physical danger by engaging in these behaviors. Paraphilias. These are sexual disorders that feature recurrent sexually arousing fantasies, urges, or behaviors that involve 1. Non-human objects, 2. The suffering or humiliation of oneself or one's partner, or 3. Children or other non-consenting persons. Men are more likely to suffer from paraphilias than women. Certain paraphilias, such as exhibitionism and voyeurism, are considered problematic because they involve the violation of a non-consenting person. Principles of classical conditioning and associative learning are used to explain the origins of paraphilias. Pedophilia is paraphilia in which an adult or older adolescent sexually fantasizes about or engages in sexual behavior with individuals who have not reached puberty. Pedophilia is more common in men than women. The research suggests that most individuals who have been sexually molested do not go on to molest others in adulthood. Low self-esteem, poor social skills, low IQ, and a history of head injuries are associated with pedophilia. Specific brain dysfunctions have been seen through brain imaging techniques that distinguish differences between pedophiles and non-pedophiles. Because of the potentially damaging results of pedophilia, treatment is of concern. Surgical castration or chemical castrations have been used to treat sex offenders who victimize children, but critics suggest that this is a means to punish, but not treat the individual. It is estimated that up to a quarter of men and nearly half of women report being troubled with a general lack of interest in sex that stems from low levels of androgen, stress, anxiety, depression, physical illness, and various drugs used to treat psychological and physical conditions. Two common disorders related to sexual response are erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation. A combination of psychological and physical factors are involved in causing erectile dysfunction, a failure of the penis to become erect. The most common complaint of men under 40 years old is premature ejaculation, the experience of orgasm before the person wishes it. Women can suffer from disorders of sexual response, including problems in sexual arousal as well as in the experience of orgasm. Typical treatment of these disorders includes prescribing medication or therapy with one's partner. Differences in sexual behavior are considered normal, and generally healthy sexual activity is an important element for a satisfying life. A sexually transmitted infection, or STI, is an infection that is contracted primarily through sexual activity, vaginal intercourse, as well as oral or anal sex. They affect about 1 in 6 adults. They can both be viral and bacterial. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS, is caused by the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, which is a sexually transmitted infection that destroys an individual's immune system. Recent improvements in drug therapies have given rise to the view that HIV is a chronic rather than terminal condition. Having sex with multiple partners is one of the predictors of contracting an STI. When correctly used, latex condoms help to prevent or significantly reduce the transmission of STIs. Programs that promote safe sex are effective if they include the erotization of condom use, which is making the use of them part of foreplay. Adolescent motivation to engage in sexual behavior includes intimacy, enhancing personal self-esteem, gaining partner or peer approval, and avoiding feelings of loneliness. Research supports the role of sexual activity in personal well-being, such that life satisfaction is related to frequency of vaginal intercourse, and that sexual activities remain a source of pleasure and experience of intimacy throughout the lifespan. In this chapter, we have defined sex and gender, defined and explained the theories of gender development, discussed the psychology of gender differences, described different sexual orientations, identified different sexual behaviors and practices, and identified sexual variations and disorders. Hopefully you can summarize how sexuality relates to personal health as well.